The story continues with Fate explaining that all kinds of warriors come to Babylon. These warriors can be mercenaries who hold a grudge against holy knights or even former holy knights themselves. Creed adds that as long as a person is strong, they will be forgiven. This is how Babylon operates, as they welcome anyone willing to help them in their fight against monsters. Fate realizes that Babylon is the best place for him to stay. Meanwhile, there's a person named Roxy Alistar in the scene. He expresses his honor in working with her, the heir of the Hart family. Roxy appreciates him for taking care of Babylon after her father's passing. Alistar remains humble, mentioning that despite fighting alongside her father, he couldn't save him. He sincerely apologizes to Roxy, who then asks if he was present during her father's final moment. Alistar confirms, and Roxy encourages him to keep his head up. She reassures him that she is there to carry on her father's will. Roxy promises that together, they will protect the people from monster invasions. They shake hands, but Miria, another character, thinks that Alistar is looking at Roxy in a way that suggests inappropriate thoughts. She wants to save Roxy because she thinks Roxy's in danger. But Mugen stops her, warning that she might get into trouble. Roxy then turns to Mugen and Miria, saying they'll be checking out the town. Meanwhile, Fate is walking around, thinking about his money situation. Staying at an inn costs 100 gold coins per day, and breakfast is an extra gold coin. Suddenly, Greed tells him to stop and look left. He sees a store display, and Greed says the scabbard is calling for him. Fate thinks it looks expensive, but Greed says they can earn money by beating monsters. The store owner comes out, asking if Fate is looking for something. However, he suddenly acts weird, checking out Fate's cloak. He notices burn marks and thinks they're from a fireball or a powerful heat attack. Fate is impressed that the guy noticed it so quickly. Greed says the guy is talented and trustworthy, but he's only interested in getting the scabbard. Fate gives in and asks how much the scabbard costs. The guy says it's just a sample and he can make one that fits the sword. Fate then asks Greed what he can do. The guy checks the sword, saying he's never seen a one-handed sword like that. He calls Greed fantastic, making the sword proud. The guy starts thinking about what kind of scabbard he can make to match Greed. He has an idea, but it will cost 500 gold coins. Fate is shocked and refuses the deal by running out of the shop. Greed just tells him to hunt monsters and get some funds, but Fate still thinks 500 gold coins is too much. He thinks the prices in the city are really high and doesn't feel he should spend that much. He decides to go hunt some monsters when he's approached by some guys. They ask if he wants to join them in hunting monsters since an extra person would help. They wonder if Fate wants to join the army as a volunteer, but Fate declines. He doesn't want to join any group. The group leader apologizes and wonders if Fate is a former holy knight because he prefers going solo. Fate is feeling confused as the guy admits he didn't recognize him due to his shabby appearance. The guy apologizes, seeming scared, and walks away. Greed advises Fate to dress up properly to avoid such encounter, but Fate can't believe he has to change his appearance just for safety. He declares that he'll get something cool but insists on hunting first. As they walk, they reach a deserted area near the border of Galia. Fate complains about the smell, and Greed explains it's because of the dead monsters around. While walking, Fate senses something odd in the air. Greed clarifies that it's spores. Fate is puzzled when he sees moss on the rocks, but Greed warns that the spores contain poison, advising him not to breathe them. Fate complains about the lack of a warning, and Greed explains that inhaling too much can lead to moss growing roots inside his lungs. Fate gets scared, but Greed dismisses it, saying this is Galia. As they continue, Greed senses a small-scale stampede. Fate looks around but can't see anything until orcs appear on the horizon. Greed identifies them as the most common monsters in Galia, using natural weapons. Greed counts 50 monsters and explains that orcs are smart and coordinate their attacks. He advises Fate to treat it like fighting against people. Fate accepts the advice, planning to apply what Barbados taught him. However, he's surprised when an orc is suddenly shot in the head with an arrow. The group from earlier appears, launching an attack. Fate thinks they were faster, but Greed complains, urging Fate to steal their prey for his luxury. Fate hesitates, pointing out its bad manners to take monsters from others. Greed counters, saying there are no rules or manners in monster hunting. More orcs appear, with Greed revealing 2 squadrons as reinforcements. Fate, still trying to be righteous, thinks he can handle them without it being considered stealing. Greed mocks him as an ally of justice, and Fate rushes in, using his speed to get close but facing fire arrows from the orcs. Fate transforms Greed into a shield to block the arrows, and Greed boasts that this new form repels physical and magical attacks. He asks for praise, but Fate tells him to be quiet as they need to focus on the battle. Uncertain about how to approach the fight, Fate looks to Greed for guidance. Greed instructs him to use the shield and smash the orcs. Fate starts running with the shield in front of him, successfully blocking every attack as he charges into the orcs, slicing them in half. Greed explains the shield bash requires strength, which Fate possesses. He continues cutting through the orcs, and by the end, all his stats are over 2 million once again. Despite the victory, Fate is surprised that his gluttony skill remains quiet, unlike before when defeating Haniel. Greed asks if the skill became quiet after defeating Haniel, and Fate confirms, attributing it to his training with Barbados. Greed accepts this explanation and tells him to collect orc ears and return to the city. When Fate returns, everyone is shocked to see him defeating so many orcs alone. He hands them to the clerk, who is also amazed. However, one of the guys from earlier accuses Fate of stealing their orcs. Greed clarifies that Fate actually saved them, but the accuser tries to take Fate's bags. In response, Fate breaks the guy's hand, prompting the rest of the group to attack him. They all gang up on Fate, but he defeats everyone with a single punch. The group leader throws a dagger, but Fate blocks it with the bag and kicks him where it hurts. In the end, Fate receives a payment of 100 gold. However, Roxy enters and questions if he's the one who took down the entire group. Fate is shocked but explains the situation. Roxy realizes it was self-defense and acknowledges that Fate went too far. However, she holds herself responsible for the declining security in Babylon due to the absence of holy knights. Despite Fate's actions, Roxy decides not only to let him go but also to have the group of troublemakers spend a night in jail for their misbehavior. Fate realizes that he's now taller than Roxy, but she asks if he hurt her. He admits that he did, but Miriam criticizes him for wearing a mask in front of Roxy, finding it disrespectful. Surprisingly, Roxy is okay with it, especially since Mugen claims that a mask can be an important piece of equipment. Fate expresses his gratitude, and Roxy asks for his name. Fate humorously replies that he's Corpse. Roxy advises him not to cause problems and suggests he learn how to dress with style. This catches Fate off guard, and he panics, running away. Everyone is left confused, especially Mugen, who comments that Fate looks weak despite beating everyone. A few minutes later, Fate walks on the street, pondering whether Roxy hates him. Greed reassures him that it's better than revealing his true identity. The sword then seizes the opportunity from Roxy's words about dressing well, and asks once again for a scabbard. Suddenly, the guy from the previous store, Jade, appears, having heard that Fate defeated the troublemakers. Fate sighs at the gossip, but Jade surprises him by asking for a fight while wearing his clothes. Confused, Fate learns that Jade is a craftsman who opened his shop 3 months ago and is still relatively unknown. Jade wants Fate to use his equipment, providing him with some ad revenue. He had been seeking a great warrior for this partnership. Since it's free gear, Fate agrees to the deal. After some work, Fate ends up resembling Kirito with a mask. However, Jade shocks him by demanding 80 gold coins in return. Fate protests, and Jade lowers it to 40 gold coins, but Fate still feels scammed. Determined to get some food, he notices a bar filled with people. Greed mentions that the food there is delicious, but Fate just wants something cheap and decides to walk away. Suddenly, a beautiful girl emerges from the bar. Fate can't take his eyes off her, feeling a strange impulse. Greed notes that Fate is getting the hang of it, and the girl approaches him, calling him by his name. Fate is shocked that she knows his identity despite the mask. She laughs it off, revealing herself as Eris, the owner of the deadly sin skill of lust. They enter the bar, and she tells him to remove his mask, claiming she can see through it anyway. Fate notices something strange happening when he looks into Eris's eyes. She apologizes, explaining that it's the effect of her lust skill, making people fall in love with her. Fate questions her statement about waiting for him, and she reveals that she's been observing him since he was in the capital. She wanted to contact him after he awakened his gluttony skill, but waited for him to meet Greed first. Fate asks if she knows about mine, and Eris claims she doesn't know much because she's a first-generation deadly sin owner like Fate. She clarifies that she isn't on good terms with mine due to having more plot. Eris expresses gratitude for Fate defeating Haniel, and he asks if she knows everything. She admits not knowing who put the cocoon there and explains that there are more chimeras, becoming harder to deal with as they evolve. She believes the Holy Knights will struggle against them and wants to discuss the main topic. Eris reveals her dual identity, as a deadly sin skill user and a guardian of the kingdom. She prioritizes the kingdom's interests over individuals for its future, aiming for prosperity in the next 1,000 years, even if it means suffering a defeat now. Fate questions her intentions, and Eris brings up a shocking proposition. Roxy must die during the Galia expedition. Fate becomes angry, but Eris introduces the concept of the hate phenomenon. Hate builds up when defeating monsters over time and generates a crowned beast. The same happens with humans, accumulating from oppression, discrimination, and poverty caused by holy knights. Roxy, being the only holy knight who cares about people, dying will create a massive amount of hatred, swallowing all other hate and giving birth to a new powerful being. Eris believes Roxy's death will lead the kingdom to a bright future, but fate vehemently denies it, insisting that nothing good will come from Roxy's death. He walks away, but Eris reveals that the plans are already in motion, and no one can stop them. Despite this, Fate remains resolute, declaring that he will protect Roxy at any cost. This brings an end to our episode.